All right, we're going to shift gears and talk to our guy, Kevin Cole from Pro Football Focus now. He hosts Unexpected Points. Kevin Cole has an interesting index on Pro Football Focus where he looks at the additions and subtractions of the teams via free agency, and he tells you what it means in the win-loss column. Kevin, are you with us?
I am. Good to join you.
So, Kevin, why don't you explain your index? Because we were joking about this earlier in the show. We've never quite really figured out WAR in baseball.
Wins
but it's
above
similar
replacement.
to what you're doing there.
It's so complicated. I don't know how you guys come up with it, really. But I love that you got Washington up there pretty high. But kind of give us the background on it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get too many nerd details here. You guys might give me a wedgie through the phone. So I'll just say that, we have our grading for every player, right? So we're really using those to figure out what is a typical average player, what would they grade, what is a replacement level player, and how many wins does that translate through, kind of looking historically by player, depending upon what they do. So we're going to value things like a quarterback passing the ball more than a running back running the ball, of course. And even on the other side, things like coverage is probably a lot more important, according to our numbers, than according to some other people. And I think that comes into play, we'll see, with the Washington football team and signing William Jackson and how that's been an important signing for them. So basically what I'm doing is I'm looking at the roster, take a snapshot of the 2020 roster, figure out if that roster did not change at all, how many wins would we project this year based upon the player personnel. And then as each move happens, I update the roster, reproject what's going to happen in 2021, and then look at the difference.
And how successful have you guys been? Like, how close are you guys, in the previous years when you do this?
I mean, it was pretty good. I think of the top 10 teams that we had last year, 8 out of 10 improved. Pretty much everyone improved that was in that top bucket. The thing is, there's obviously a lot that goes into this number that isn't necessarily based on what happened in the last year. I mean, certain teams got lucky last year, luckier than others. I mean, for instance, a team to point out would be like, let's say the Browns. They probably won more games than they should have won last year, so they're going to be a worse team this year no matter whether their roster gets better or not, on average. So it doesn't account for things like that, but generally it shows the trend really well. And the top teams last year had come through and done better. The top teams from last year's index did better in 2020.
So that makes me want to follow up then. So last year's Washington team, I mean, everybody was goofing on them, right? Worst team in the playoffs, et cetera. You win your division with 7 wins. It's kind of embarrassing. But fine, I'm a fan, so I wanted to go to the playoffs. Let's do this. Where do you rank their sort of 7 wins? Did they do about how you thought they would do? Did they overachieve, underachieve? How did you rank last year's team?
I think that they were pretty much in line of where they should have been. I mean, the easiest thing you can look at when you look at a team is say, what is their point differential over the course of the season? Now, sometimes that can be skewed by big wins or big losses and so on and so forth, but it's generally a pretty good way to look at things. So they were plus 6 points over the season. So that tracks as roughly an 8-8 team. So that's pretty good. And again, like the teams that I was talking about, like the Cleveland Browns were minus 11 on the season. So their opponents actually outscored them on the season, and they were 11-5. So that's a team to look out for. But I would say Washington really was like an 8-8 team last year.
So that's good. So if we were an 8-8 team last year and you got us as the second most improved so far, hey, this is a good trajectory, Cakes, if things play out, without craziness.
Sure.
Right? This is a team on the rise,
yeah.
Kev.
This is definitely a team on the rise. I mean, okay, so the improvement index, one of the big movers here, and I know people are not necessarily going to associate a move like bringing in Ryan Fitzpatrick as being that much of an upgrade, but the thing is, he has been a solidly average to maybe even slightly above average quarterback the last couple of years playing for the Miami Dolphins, a team that, they lack a lot on offense, especially on offensive line, which may be which isn't the greatest point, I would say, of the Washington football team. So he did really, really well there. He did surprisingly well when he played for Tampa Bay. So I think if you could bring in an average quarterback at a small price, yeah, it's a short-term move, but you have the other pieces in place. You're drafting 19, so you're kind of in no man's land when it comes to getting a quarterback. I mean, this is one of the best moves, I think, on a short-term basis if you think it has a roster that can compete, and I think that roster can compete, especially in the NFC East. It was a great move to bring him in, so he has a pretty outsized impact on this, in addition to, like I mentioned, William Jackson coming in.
joined by Kevin Cole from Pro Football Focus at Kevin Cole PFF, and your colleague at PFF, Sam Monson. He penned an article, Washington football team's edition of Ryan Fitzpatrick could spell a career year for wide receiver Terry McLaurin. McLaurin has to be overjoyed at seeing Fitzpatrick in the quarterback room, a guy who will actually push the ball downfield, unlike Alex Smith and some of the other guys that have been throwing him the ball since he's been here.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing about Fitzpatrick is he is not afraid to throw into coverage. And that's another reason why sometimes he can avoid sacks for bad offensive lines because he's willing to get rid of the ball. So I think McLaurin's going to benefit a lot, and I'm really interested to see what they're going to do if they pick up another receiver because this receiver free agent class it's kind of been a dud so far. We haven't seen Kenny Golladay move. We haven't seen Juju Smith-Schuster move. I think those are a couple of guys where they play the contested catch game, and sometimes teams aren't really into those players as much as they used to be in the past. This prototypical, taller, bigger wide receiver, they like to see guys get wide open. Well, Fitzpatrick has worked really well in the past with contested catch guys, whether it's Devontae Parker. Last year it was Mike Evans with the Bucks. It was all the way back to the Jets playing with Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. So I feel like if they can pick up one of those guys maybe on a one-year contract, a cheap one-year contract, that can really add to the room with Terry McLaurin continuing to play the X wide receiver and opening up the offense.
All right, sticking to your improvement index, which of the other NFC East teams has improved the most and who's done the worst thus far?
Well, let me scroll down here. I mean, we don't have a ton of improvement in the NFC East here. I think most of the teams here are on the decline. In fact, all of them are on the decline according to this. Now, the thing is, the Eagles, that quarterback switch, as much as you could like what Jalen Hurts did in limited time, when we're projecting him going forward, we're still going to say, hey, this guy was a second-round quarterback, a mid-second-round quarterback. Typically, they aren't going to be that great going forward, and he didn't really grade that well for us. So we actually see that as a downgrade, despite the fact that Wentz was so bad last year. And the rest of the teams are just kind of ho-hum, just kind of treading water. They've been losing and gaining players, but no one has really gained in the same way as Washington has. So Washington's been the clear winner in that off-season index. Now, Dak Prescott was the biggest move, but we have that as being a lateral move because we were projecting him. He was on the roster in 2020. We were already projecting him to be on the team.
All right, so what about William Jackson? How does that improve? They let Darby go, and we were talking about that once Darby went to Denver because it was a clear need now that Darby was gone, but they didn't waste time, and they went out and got Jackson, who we don't know much about. It's not like we were watching Bengals games every week, but he was on most lists the top corner available. So where does that put them in terms of the improvement?
Yeah. I mean, we have to net those out, as you mentioned, Darby leaving and then Jackson coming in. So, again, when we just look at Jackson being added to the roster without Darby, it's one of the biggest gains that we're seeing of any player coming in. He's our top-rated guy. When you net out Darby, it's still a decent gain. It's not a huge gain, but it's going to be one of the bigger gains. For us, it's going to raise the WAR by a couple of percent, which is good. And I think for Jackson, what's interesting is this wasn't the greatest cornerback class, but the price that you're paying isn't over the top necessarily for these guys either. A lot of them are kind of glorified 1 or 2 year deals if things don't work out. And a lot of times when we're looking at coverage, it is a system where you want to have at least competent play across the board. So I think if guys like Kendall Fuller can play a little bit better along with William Jackson, all that can return to form. They should have a solidified back end, which obviously up front they're very, very, very strong.
So Vegas doesn't have Washington as obviously all of these teams are going to add players, okay? Because you got the draft, you got more free agency. But just based on what these teams have now on their rosters, Vegas has Washington as second behind Dallas, okay? Where would you stack Washington in the division in terms of best in the division? Where do you think Washington's the favorite now that they added Fitzpatrick, or you still have Dallas ahead of them?
Well, I've lost enough change in doing so a little bit of wagering myself in the past to know that I'm not necessarily going to bet against what we have for the betting odds there. So I wouldn't say that Washington is the favorite. I think it may be a little bit closer than what those odds have it. Primarily because I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is a little bit better than what the market may view him. The question is really going to be the defense. And as I know, outstanding performance from the defense last year in a division that really had a depressed year across the board. So I guess if the division plays a little bit better, if that defense maybe isn't as good, because we typically see defensive play is not as stable year over year for teams as the offensive play is, because quarterback play and other things like that are a lot more stable than what we have, whether it be interceptions or sacks or other things that happen on the defensive end. So that's really going to be the key. And I think that's why there's a little bit more skepticism with what happens with Washington than maybe what happens with the Cowboys when you know all of those high-powered offensive pieces are returning next season.
Kevin, good to be an offensive lineman in 2021. Trent Williams, he bags $55 million guaranteed in his new deal, and Joe Thuney gets nearly $50 million from the Kansas City Chiefs in the past week.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild. I was commenting earlier today that I was just thinking about the Trent Williams, like every instinct that I have saying, a record-breaking deal, most guaranteed money, everything else for a soon-to-be 33-year-old who is not a quarterback. Like it's something that, like just that on its face sounds like an awful move. But then you watch a few of these Trent Williams highlights, and you see all that he's doing and the movement skills and everything else, despite his age, and you start to buy in on something like that. I mean, what I will say about Williams, and I think I'm a little bit more comfortable with that deal in some ways than I am with the Thuney deal, is the fact that the left tackle is almost impossible to get a really, really high-end left tackle in free agency. You can get guards in free agency. You can't really get that left tackle play. The thing is with the offensive line, though, is you want to have competency across the board. So if you're investing too much in one particular position, I think it can be detrimental. And that's why with what the Chiefs are doing here, investing in guard, I'm a little bit more skeptical after losing both of their tackles in the offseason, but maybe they just didn't really think that they could address that position in free agency.
Real quick, just kind of bouncing around, New England has added 11 players so far, either through free agency or trades. They've got 2 tight ends. They got 2 receivers. They went out and got 3 defensive linemen. They got a couple of offensive linemen. So 11 players here in the last 3 days. But they re-signed Cam, and I'm not a huge Cam guy, Kevin. So where do you have them right now?
Cam, though, with new tight ends and new receivers.
Okay.
He's got them number one, Jason.
But how many more wins do you think they can get with all of those guys?
Well, okay, so if I look at them last season, they were 7-9, and they were basically a 7-9 team. I think what we have to think about is that, I'm a little skeptical on Cam Newton too, but, Brady looked pretty bad in when we look back to 2019 when he didn't have much to throw to also. So I think you're getting competency, at least across the board, which is good. You're also getting some opt-outs returning on defense, like Dante Hightower, Patrick Chung, some other guys there. So I think those are also big moves. So this is really going to be a remade roster in 2021. The problem is the Bills have really emerged as a strong team. They were able to get continuity, and they were able to re-sign all the guys they really wanted to this offseason. The Miami Dolphins are a team on the rise. So I think they're just really some strong headwinds for the Patriots getting back to the playoffs this year. And it's really going to be whether or not Cam Newton, who's had a tendency to fade away in the second half of seasons after starting strong, running the ball a lot, whether or not he can hold up for the entire season. I guess it's possible they go somewhere in the draft. I'm a little bit more skeptical of that because they don't have a great draft position. And it seems like Belichick is, 68 years old, and he's kind of going, I wouldn't say all in, but he's going pretty strongly in to remake this roster for the next couple of years.
All right, Kevin, appreciate the time.
Good stuff. Thank you. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.